Today's story takes place in a district of Haryana called Yamuna. In this district, there is a neighborhood known as Nagar colony. A young woman named Kajol, 27 years old, returned home after a visit to the market. As she reached her house, something felt strange. Kajol rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She tried again and again, but still, no response came from inside. Feeling uneasy, she decided to push the door, and to her surprise, it was unlocked. She called out for her mother and brother, but the house remained silent. Worried, Kajol stepped inside and made her way to the drawing room. What she saw next was horrifying. Her brother was lying on the floor, covered in blood. He wasn't moving. In shock, Kajol's heart sank as she realized he was no longer alive. Her mind raced with fear and confusion. Trembling, she ran further into the house, desperately searching for her mother. She reached the bedroom, and there her worst fear came true. Her mother was also lying lifeless, with blood all over. It was clear that someone had hit her with something heavy. The entire house was in chaos, furniture overturned, belongings scattered across the floor. Kajol's world had turned upside down in an instant. Crying and screaming, she stood in the middle of the wrecked home, completely shattered by the sudden tragedy. Kajol's screams echoed through the quiet streets of Nagar colony, growing louder with each passing moment. Soon, the neighbors rushed out of their homes, their curiosity mixed with worry. What could have caused such a heart-wrenching cry? People gathered around her house, whispering anxiously to one another, unsure of what horrors awaited them inside. Shaking with fear and grief, Kajol managed to calm herself just enough to dial 112. Her voice was trembling, but her words were clear. "My brother and my mother have been murdered. Please come as soon as possible." The people of the colony gathered outside, unable to believe what they were hearing. Some bravely entered the house, only to face a scene straight out of their worst nightmares: two lifeless bodies, covered in blood, lying still. The mother and son, who were once full of life, now lay cold and unmoving. Shock and fear spread quickly through the crowd. Who could have done this, and why? These questions filled everyone's minds. Trust me, the reason behind this ruthless act will keep you up at night. It wasn't long before the police from Yamuna arrived at the scene, responding quickly to Kajol's desperate call. By then, more people had gathered, including Kajol's relatives who had heard the dreadful news. The police immediately began investigating, carefully examining every inch of the house, hoping to find clues that could explain this horrific crime. The investigation revealed the tragic truth: both Meena, Kajol's mother, and Rahul, her brother, had been killed in a brutal manner. They had been struck on the head with a heavy object, which had left deep wounds. As if that wasn't enough, they were also strangled to death. The police found a mobile phone charging cable at the scene, which had been used to strangle the victims. Additionally, the whole house was a mess, with things thrown around everywhere. When the police checked the house's security cameras, they quickly noticed something strange. The killers had turned off the CCTV camera. But unlike most criminals, they didn't take the DVR with them. Usually, to avoid leaving any evidence behind, criminals make sure to take the DVR so no one can view the recorded footage. But in this case, they only switched off the camera, leaving the DVR behind. This puzzled the police because it meant that whatever was recorded before the camera was switched off could still be on the DVR and might hold important clues to identify the killers. Although there were no eyewitnesses to the crime, Kajol, the only daughter of the family, was the one who had found her mother and brother dead. She was understandably shaken, but the police had to start their investigation by questioning her first. Kajol told them that she had spent the afternoon at the beauty parlor. While she was on her way back home, she received a message from her mother asking her to buy 2 juice packets. She picked them up, unaware of the nightmare that awaited her at home. As Kajol entered the house with the juice packets, she found herself in a living nightmare. Her mother and brother had been murdered, and her peaceful world had been shattered. The untouched juice packets she had brought were still lying in the house. Kajol showed the police a message on her phone that her mother had sent earlier, asking her to bring juice. This backed up Kajol's story, confirming that she had indeed gone to buy the juice as her mother requested. However, there was still something that troubled the police. The house's only CCTV camera had been turned off. When the police questioned Kajol about this, she appeared just as puzzled as they were. She had no idea who had turned off the camera or why it had been done. Despite this, the police pressed on with their investigation. They began looking into the other CCTV cameras installed along the street to see if they could gather any more information. It wasn't long before they found something unusual. The footage from a nearby camera showed a boy with a cloth covering his face entering Kajol's house in the morning. A short while later, the same boy was seen leaving the house carrying something in his hands. What made this discovery even more strange was that Kajol herself was still inside the house when the boy had entered. The police then noticed that after the boy left, Kajol was seen leaving the house as well. This raised a lot of questions in their minds. Who was this mysterious boy who had visited the house? Why was his face covered, and why had Kajol not mentioned him? When the police asked Kajol about the boy, her reaction only deepened their suspicions. She became visibly nervous, hesitating to provide any clear answers, making the police wonder if there was something more she wasn't telling them. The police were already confused about why the CCTV camera had been turned off, and Kajol's nervousness when asked about the boy made them even more suspicious. The investigation found that the camera in the house had been switched off earlier in the morning on the day of the incident. Kajol said in her statement that at that time, there were no burglars, and no murders had happened. This suggested that someone in the house had turned off the camera. However, Kajol said she left the house around 2 p.m., and everything was normal when she left. Kajol claimed she returned home around 3 p.m., implying the murders happened between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Meanwhile, the police had sent Meena and Rahul's bodies for autopsy, but when the autopsy report came back, the police realized Kajol was lying about when her mother and brother were killed. According to the doctors who did the autopsy, the murders had happened about 6 to 7 hours before the bodies were found, around 10 a.m. The new timeline made it clear that Kajol was at home when the crime took place. The investigation of what seemed to be a simple case of robbery at Kajol's house quickly turned into a complex and sinister murder inquiry. Initially sympathetic with Kajol's case, the police began to notice inconsistencies within her version of events. The CCTV evidence and contradictory statements of Kajol made the police question their initial assessment of the alleged robbery case. It was the life of conflict from inside and from outside for Kajol. Growing up in a family deeply respectful of tradition, there was often a sense that Kajol's assertions of identity were too aberrant. She dressed differently, behaved differently, more often against the grain. That her family could not stomach was a cause of further isolation, deep inside emotional spaces and deep inside. From all this emotional turmoil came the tragic incidents that now form a testament to unaddressed identity crises as well as family conflicts. This case raises very strong moral and ethical questions. What makes a person turn against his family? How do the expectations of society and pressures from family shape our actions, and what happens when such pressures become unbearable? The narrative challenges viewers to consider these questions, walking along the thin line between right and wrong and the destructive power of judgment and misunderstanding. Kajol, a complex figure chiseled from her life and its conflicts, represented the exact expectations that were suffocating her. Her inability to understand or accept this identity further opened up the avenue of division in her family. Kajol's close relationship with Rahul's wife broke the fragile ties that were being held between them and kept her even more secluded and desperate. This was worsened by a family estate dispute between her and cousins Krish and Ison, who, incidentally, had their own grievances. It had already made Kajol's cousins hate their Aunt Meena as she had inherited her grandmother's baby's property without giving them a pie, something that had left the young girls bitter. When Kajol proposed an alliance and promised them the property besides promising a financial reward, they jumped at the opportunity, but for tragic consequences. As the drama unfolds, there is smart tension management balanced with insightful moments to absorb and eventually release the emotional weight built in viewers. Each level of deception and motive laid out through each piece of evidence advances the plot in conjunction with the psychological involvement of characters. The face masked, it was Kish, the brother of Krish, who entered Kajol's house on the morning of June 23. Kajol had deactivated the internal cameras but had forgotten those put outside. Together they acted out their plan with remorseless efficiency. Kajol attacked her mother, who had fallen unconscious, before using deadlier weapons. When Rahul returned, they performed this cruel task once again, posing it as a robbery by leaving traces of ransacking of her house and taking valuables. Despite all this, the Haryana police were really meticulous and professional. They put together a timeline and motives in minute detail. Within hours, they managed to apprehend Kajol, Kish, and Ison. Even though Ison did not actually commit the crime, he was undoubtedly involved in planning it. This story touched your heart or made you reflect in a deeper way? Be sure to like the video below and share your thoughts down in the comments. Your thoughts are priceless.